The C-17 descended through Iraqi airspace carrying 32 Navy SEALs, all veterans of Fallujah, Ramadi, and Mosul except one. Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Tillman sat rigid in his seat, 23 years old, fresh from Bud-S graduation, surrounded by men who'd seen more firefights than he'd eaten hot meals. His platoon chief, Senior Chief Nathan Vickers, had briefed them 3 times already. Hostile territory, possible ambush, extraction point compromised. Standard insertion until it wasn't. The aircraft banked hard left at 4,000 feet, engines screaming as the pilot took evasive action from ground fire nobody had predicted. Marcus felt his stomach drop, hands white-knuckled on his rifle. Across from him, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez met his eyes with a look that said everything you're about to find out what this really costs. They hit the ground 12 clicks north of Ramadi in pre-dawn darkness, January 2007, when the Anbar province belonged to insurgents and ghosts. The team moved in tactical formation through a village that intelligence swore was abandoned. Marcus kept his weapon up, following Rodriguez's shoulder, breathing through his nose like they'd taught him. The smell hit first burning rubber, human waste, something else he couldn't name. Then the silence broke. AK-47 fire erupted from 3 positions simultaneously, muzzle flashes painting the darkness in stuttering orange bursts. The SEALs returned fire with disciplined precision, dropping back toward a stone compound that offered minimal cover. Marcus found himself pressed against crumbling concrete, rounds impacting inches above his head, showering him with ancient dust. Viper 1-6, this is Anvil Actual, Senior Chief Vickers' voice cut through the radio static, steady despite the chaos. We are compromised, taking effective fire from multiple positions, requesting immediate air support. How copy? The response came through crackling with interference. Anvil Actual, Viper 1-6 copies all. Be advised, nearest fast movers are 23 minutes out. Can you hold position? 23 minutes. Marcus calculated quickly. They had maybe 4 magazines left per man, surrounded by an enemy force that outnumbered them 3-1 based on the incoming volume of fire. He looked at Rodriguez, saw the older SEAL checking his remaining ammunition with the calm efficiency of a man who'd been here before. Then he looked at the youngest member besides himself, Petty Officer Jenkins, 19 years old, taking shallow breaths that Marcus recognized as the beginning of panic. Negative, Viper, Senior Chief Vickers said quietly. We need something airborne now, or you'll be coordinating a recovery operation instead of extraction. There was a pause that lasted 3 heartbeats while machine gun fire tore through their position. Then a different voice came through, female, with a Kentucky accent that carried the weight of someone who'd already decided what was about to happen. The sun hadn't broken the horizon yet when Captain Lena Ruskin started her pre-flight check on the A-10 Thunderbolt at Al-Assad Air Base. She moved around the aircraft with the systematic efficiency of someone who'd performed this ritual 743 times before, once for every combat sortie she'd flown since 2003. The Warthog sat on the tarmac like a monument to ugliness and purpose, gray paint scarred by 4 years of desert operations. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon protruding from its nose like the business end of God's own judgment. Lena ran her hand along the fuselage near the cockpit where someone had stenciled Mama Bear in careful letters, her call sign since Afghanistan, when she'd spent 11 hours orbiting a surrounded Marine unit, returning to base only when her fuel gauge read 0 and her ammunition counter showed empty. She was 41 years old, divorced, mother of a 7-year-old daughter named Emma who lived with her ex-husband in Lexington, and absolutely the last pilot the hotshot F-16 jocks at Al-Assad took seriously. Ruskin, you're up for daylight patrol, her squadron commander had told her during the 400 brief, Captain Diana Torres, one of 3 women flying close air support in western Iraq. Nothing exciting, just presence operations along the Euphrates corridor. Presence operations, Military speak for flying circles while the real action happened elsewhere. Lena had nodded, accepted the assignment without comment, and watched the younger pilot's Lieutenant Commander Brett Haverson and his wingman receive the actual combat tasking with all the self-importance of fighter pilots who believed warfare meant flying fast and looking good. She'd seen that attitude before, had stopped trying to fight it years ago. Let them have their glory runs. She'd just do her job. But 20 minutes into her patrol, cruising at 12,000 feet with the desert spreading beneath her like crumpled tan paper, she caught the radio transmission. Viper 16, this is Anvil Actual. We are compromised, taking effective fire from multiple positions, requesting immediate air support. How copy? Lena adjusted her heading before the air controller even responded. She knew that call sign Anvil Actual was SEAL Team 5, operating somewhere north of Ramadi in territory that belonged to Al-Qaeda in Iraq. She knew because she studied the operations board every morning, memorized which ground units operated where, understood that being ready meant knowing who might need her before they called. Be advised, nearest fast movers are 23 minutes out. Can you hold position? Negative, Viper. We need something airborne now, or you'll be coordinating a recovery operation instead of extraction. Lena keyed her radio without hesitation. Viper 16, Hog 27, I'm 12 minutes northeast of Ramadi with full combat load. How copy? The silence that followed carried surprise and something else, relief mixed with skepticism. Hog 27, Viper copies. Say aircraft type. A-10 Thunderbolt. 30mm cannon with 1,100 rounds, 6 AGM-65 Mavericks, 2 LAU rocket pods. I can be overhead in 10 mics and stay until Winchester or Bingo fuel. Another pause, then, Hog 27, we are passing your information to Anvil Actual. Stand by for coordinates. Lena pushed the throttles forward and dropped her nose, trading altitude for speed. Marcus heard the exchange through his earpiece while pressing himself against the compound wall, rifle up, firing controlled bursts at muzzle flashes that seemed to multiply in the growing light. An A-10. He'd seen them at Nellie's during training, ungainly things that looked like they'd been assembled from spare parts in spite. The Air Force pilots who flew them were cargo haulers compared to the sleek fighter jocks, or so everyone said. Now one was apparently coming to save their lives. 10 minutes, Rodriguez shouted over the gunfire. We hold for 10 minutes. Petty Officer Jenkins had stopped returning fire, his rifle lowered, eyes wide with something Marcus recognized because he felt it too. The absolute certainty that 10 minutes was a lifetime they didn't have. The insurgents had found their range now, rounds impacting with methodical precision, walking up the wall toward their position. Senior Chief Vickers moved between his men like a shepherd among wolves, directing fire, redistributing ammunition, projecting confidence that existed solely because leaders projected confidence when their men needed it. Marcus's rifle clicked empty. He dropped the magazine, hands shaking as he reached for a fresh one, and in that moment of vulnerability understood with crystal clarity what the instructors at Bud S had tried to teach him. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to function despite it. He slammed the magazine home, charged the weapon, and returned to firing because Rodriguez was watching, and because stopping meant dying, and because somewhere overhead, an ungainly aircraft flown by someone he'd never met was racing toward them through the dawn. Anvil Actual, Hog 27 is 5 minutes out. Authenticate Bravo Tango 19er. Hog 27, Anvil authenticates Charlie Romeo 37. We are taking heavy fire from grid November Quebec 473682. Danger close to our position, mark my smoke. Copy danger close, I have your grid. Anvil, what's your situation? Senior Chief Vickers keyed his radio with his left hand while firing his rifle with his right. Hog, we are 32 personnel pinned in a stone compound, effective enemy fire from north, northeast, and east positions. We have one urgent surgical, multiple casualties pending if we don't break contact immediately. There was no hesitation in the response. Understood, Anvil. I'm coming in from the west. When you hear my gun, that's your signal to move. Marcus glanced at Rodriguez. The older SEAL was listening to something on command frequency, then gave a thumbs up to Senior Chief Vickers. Whatever was about to happen had been authorized at levels Marcus didn't understand. He checked Jenkins, saw the kid had found his courage again, was firing controlled bursts at the roofline where an insurgent machine gunner had established position. Then Marcus heard it, not the high-pitched scream of jet engines but a lower, angrier sound, like industrial machinery accelerating toward violence. Lena came in at 300 feet, the A-10 stable despite the speed, her eyes scanning the terrain below through the heads-up display. She saw the compound immediately, gray stone structure with seals visible as dark shapes pressed against the walls. She saw the muzzle flashes from surrounding buildings, counted at least 4 machine gun positions, and a dozen fighters with small arms. She saw one SEAL down with 2 others dragging him toward cover. She saw all of this in 3 seconds while calculating angles, trajectories, collateral damage, and acceptable risk. Anvil, guns, guns, guns. The GAU-8 Avenger spun up with its characteristic sound BRRRT-70 rounds per second of depleted uranium, leaving the cannon at speeds that made buildings explode into dust and human bodies cease to exist. Lena walked the fire across the northern positions first, watched the roofline disintegrate, pivoted slightly, and hammered the machine gun nest that had pinned the SEALs from the east. The aircraft shuddered with recoil despite weighing 23 tons. She pulled up at 200 feet, banked hard left, and came around for another pass. Hog 27, that's effective. You are cleared hot on northeast positions. The insurgents had scattered, some running between buildings, others attempting to establish new firing positions. Lena switched to her Mavericks, locked onto a technical truck with a mounted weapon that was repositioning, and pickled off one missile. The AGM-65 streaked downward with perfect precision, and the technical ceased to exist in a fireball that sent black smoke climbing into the pale morning sky. Anvil, you have a clear corridor southwest toward the river. Recommend you move now. Below, Marcus watched the SEALs execute their breakout with the precision of men who'd trained for exactly this moment. They moved in fire teams, covering each other, carrying their wounded, maintaining discipline despite the chaos. Above them, the A-10 orbited like a protective angel, and Marcus understood suddenly why they called her Mama Bear. The extraction took 40 minutes. Lena stayed overhead for every second, firing precision strikes whenever insurgents attempted to regroup, talking calmly to Senior Chief Vickers about enemy positions and movement routes, conserving her ammunition because she knew wounded men moved slowly and needed time. She made 9 gun runs total, expended all 6 Mavericks, and used her remaining cannon rounds to suppress a mortar team that tried to establish position during the extraction's final phase. Hog 27, Anvil actual. All personnel extracted to secondary pickup zone. You just saved 32 lives today. Lena keyed her radio, voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. Copy that, Anvil. Get your boys home safe. She turned southeast toward Al-Assad with her fuel gauge showing 15 minutes remaining and her ammunition counter reading double zeros. The sun had fully risen now, painting the desert in shades of amber and gold. Somewhere over the Euphrates, she thought about Emma, wondered if her daughter would ever understand what her mother did in this strange and violent place, then pushed the thought away because sentiment was a luxury combat pilots couldn't afford. The debrief at Al-Assad lasted 2 hours. Lena sat in the operations center with her squadron commander and 2 colonels she didn't recognize, walking them through every decision, every weapon's employment, every second of the engagement. They listened with the careful attention of officers who understood that danger close fire support was the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. When she finished, one of the colonels, A man with graying hair and combat infantryman badge from the First Gulf War nodded slowly. Captain Ruskin, that was textbook close air support. Those SEALs are alive because you made good decisions under pressure. Lena accepted the compliment with a simple nod. She didn't mention that she'd been making those decisions for 4 years, that every sortie she flew carried the weight of men on the ground who needed her to be perfect, because perfect meant they went home. She didn't mention that being the only A-10 pilot available when the call came wasn't coincidence but preparation, that she'd positioned herself in exactly the right patrol area because she'd anticipated where the fighting would be. Outside the operations center, she found Lieutenant Commander Haverson and his F-16 squadron returning from their mission. They taxied past her Warthog with its empty weapons pylons and scarred paint, their aircraft gleaming and untouched. Haverson saw her standing on the tarmac and gave a casual wave, the kind of acknowledgement you offered support personnel who did necessary but unglamorous work. Lena walked back to her aircraft and ran her hand along the fuselage one more time. Mama Bear. She'd earned that call sign protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, and no amount of dismissive attitudes from fighter jocks could change what she knew in her bones, that this ugly, slow, heavily armored beast was exactly what the men on the ground needed when everything went to hell. She didn't know that Marcus Tillman had asked Senior Chief Vickers for her name during the helicopter ride back to base, or that he'd written it down carefully in the small notebook he carried. She didn't know that every SEAL who'd survived that morning would remember her call sign for the rest of their lives. The second incident happened 6 weeks later in Fallujah, and this time Marcus was ready. The platoon had inserted pre-dawn for a high-value target raid on a compound intelligence believed housed an al-Qaeda cell leader. The mission brief had been thorough, the planning meticulous, the execution perfect, until the target building proved to be empty and the surrounding streets filled with insurgents who'd anticipated exactly this trap. They'd withdrawn to a 3-story building that offered defensive positions and limited access points, but limited access meant limited escape routes. Marcus found himself on the 2nd floor with Rodriguez and 4 others, firing through windows at fighters who seemed to materialize from every doorway and alley. The firefight had been going 20 minutes when their team leader made the call. Viper 1-6, Anvil Actual. We are decisively engaged in Fallujah Sector 7, requesting immediate CAS. How copy? The response came faster this time, the air controller already coordinating assets. Anvil Actual, Viper copies. We have Hog 2-7 airborne 15 minutes southwest of your position. Can you mark your building? Marcus felt something release in his chest, a tension he hadn't known he was carrying. Hog 2-7, Mama Bear. The pilot who'd saved them in Ramadi was already in the air, already close enough to matter. Viper, affirmative. Anvil will mark with IR strobe and green smoke. Copy. IR strobe and green smoke. Hog 2-7 is inbound, stand by. Rodriguez caught Marcus's eye across the room and grinned. That's our girl, he shouted over the gunfire. We're going home. Lena had been flying a routine patrol along the Fallujah corridor when the call came through, and she'd adjusted course immediately, pushing her A-10 to maximum cruise speed while requesting the grid coordinates and situation update. The air controller gave her the details in crisp sentences. SEALs trapped in a building, surrounded, taking fire from 360 degrees, at least 40 insurgents in the surrounding area. Hog 2-7, be advised this is urban environment, multiple civilian structures, extreme caution on weapons employment. Lena descended through 8,000 feet, eyes scanning the city sprawling beneath her. Viper, Hog copies all. I'll need precise target coordinates and positive identification before engaging. Is Anvil equipped with laser designators? Affirmative, Anvil has ground laser. They're ready to paint targets on your command. Outstanding, Hog is 3 minutes out. She came in from the north, slower this time, using altitude to survey the tactical situation. The building was obvious 3 stories, green smoke billowing from the roof, IR strobe flashing in her helmet-mounted display. The surrounding streets showed movement, fighters repositioning between structures, attempting to establish positions for a final assault on the SEAL position. Anvil Actual, Hog 27 has your position visual. I need your ground laser on hostile positions starting with most immediate threats. Senior Chief Vickers responded immediately. Hog, laser is hot on building northwest of our position. Second floor window, crew-served weapon. Lena saw it, the laser designation painting a window where she could just make out the barrel of a heavy machine gun. She adjusted her approach angle, calculated the solution, and fired a Maverick from 4,000 feet. Inside the building, Marcus watched through his window as the missile impacted with surgical precision. The explosion contained mostly within the target structure, collateral damage minimal. The machine gun that had been suppressing their position simply ceased to exist. Then Mama Bear's voice came through calm and unhurried. Anvil, that's one. Give me the next threat. For the next 40 minutes, Lena worked the target area with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a protective mother. She fired when the SEALs designated targets, held fire when civilian movement appeared in her sensors, and orbited endlessly while insurgents tried to break contact and failed. She used her cannons sparingly in the urban environment, preferring the precision of her remaining Mavericks for identified threats. When her weapons ran dry, she continued orbiting, using her presence alone to suppress enemy movement, while a Marine quick reaction force fought through to extract the pinned SEALs. Hog 27, Anvil Actual. Marines have reached our position. We are consolidating for extraction. Once again, you kept us alive when it mattered. Copy that, Anvil. Stay safe down there. Lena turned back toward Al-Assad with empty pylons and almost no fuel remaining, pushing her range to the absolute limit, because those extra minutes overhead had mattered to men who depended on her. She landed with her fuel gauge reading 5 minutes remaining, technically below minimums. Definitely worth a conversation with her squadron commander. Absolutely worth it. But this time was different. This time, when she climbed down from her aircraft, she found her squadron commander waiting with a full colonel she didn't recognize, and standing slightly behind them, Senior Chief Nathan Vickers, still in his combat gear with desert dust coating his uniform. The SEAL stepped forward and extended his hand. Captain Ruskin, I wanted to meet the pilot who's saved my men twice now. Lena shook his hand, meeting his eyes with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth regardless of who acknowledged it. Senior Chief, your men make it easy. They know what they're doing down there. With respect, ma'am, so do you. We've worked with a lot of CAS pilots in this deployment. You're the only one who's perfect every single time. The word hung in the desert air: perfect. Not adequate, not sufficient, not good enough. Perfect. Lena felt something shift, some weight she'd been carrying for 4 years suddenly redistributing across her shoulders in a more manageable way. I appreciate that, Senior Chief, but I'm just doing my job. No, ma'am, Vickers said quietly. You're doing it better than anyone else. The debrief that followed was different in tone from previous ones. The colonel turned out he was the JSOC liaison for Western Iraq, wanted specific details about her targeting methodology, her decision-making process under pressure, her ability to maintain situation awareness in complex urban environments. He listened carefully, took notes, and when she finished, he exchanged glances with her squadron commander. Captain Ruskin, we'd like to make you the primary CAS asset for SEAL operations in Anbar Province. That means priority tasking, dedicated frequency monitoring, and direct coordination with ground team leaders. You'd essentially be on call whenever they're operating. Lena processed this information carefully. It meant more combat sorties, more time away from base, more exposure to the kind of danger that had already killed 3 A-10 pilots in this theater. It also meant doing exactly what she'd trained for, what she was demonstrably better at than almost anyone else flying in Iraq. I accept, sir. Outstanding. We'll have the operational details worked out by tomorrow morning. After they left, her squadron commander lingered, studying Lena with an expression that mixed pride and concern. You know this is going to be brutal, right? The SEALs don't stop. They operate constantly, and if you're their go-to CAS, you'll be flying almost every day. I know, ma'am. And you're okay with that? Lena looked across the tarmac at her A-10, scarred and ugly and absolutely perfect for what it did. They need someone they can trust completely. Someone who will be there every single time, no excuses, no failures. That's what I do. Her squadron commander nodded slowly. That's what worries me. Everyone has limits, Lena, even you. Then I'll find mine when I reach them. Until then, those men deserve someone who shows up. The next 6 months proved her squadron commander's concerns prophetic. Lena flew 68 combat sorties supporting SEAL operations throughout Anbar province 68 times. She strapped into Mama Bear and headed toward men in contact. Men trapped. Men who needed her to be absolutely perfect because anything less meant they died. She learned the names of the team leaders, memorized their call signs and tactical preferences, understood instinctively how each unit operated under pressure. Marcus Tillman was part of 14 of those operations. He watched her work from the ground perspective, saw how she positioned herself before the call came, how she conserved ammunition knowing follow-on engagements were likely, how she talked to them during contact with the calm certainty of someone who'd seen worse and brought everyone home anyway. He started keeping notes about her tactics in the same notebook where he'd written her name after Ramadi analytical observations that gradually became something closer to admiration, and then something deeper than that. But the operational tempo was unsustainable, and everyone knew it. Lena lost 12 pounds she couldn't afford to lose, developed a tremor in her left hand that appeared only after missions, and stopped calling home because hearing Emma's voice made the distance unbearable. Her squadron commander ordered her to take 3 days leave. She took one, spent it reading intelligence reports and studying maps of Anbar province, then returned to flight status claiming she was rested. The truth was she couldn't stop. Somewhere in those 6 months, the mission had stopped being about professional competence and become about personal responsibility. Those men on the ground weren't abstractions anymore. They were Vickers and Rodriguez, and the young SEAL named Tillman who was getting better at his job every time she saw him. They were real people with families and futures who lived or died, based on whether she made the right decision in 3 seconds while flying at 300 feet through a sky filled with things designed to kill her. The breaking point came in September, though she didn't recognize it as such at the time. The mission was supposed to be straightforward and intelligence-gathering operation in a village west of Ramadi. Low threat assessment, minimal enemy presence expected. Lena was airborne providing overwatch, orbiting at 15,000 feet in the clear morning sky when everything went wrong simultaneously. The village wasn't abandoned. It was an elaborate ambush carefully constructed to destroy an entire SEAL platoon. Marcus was there, had just entered a compound when the first RPG screamed past his head and detonated against the wall behind him. Then the world became fire and noise, and he was moving on instinct, following Rodriguez toward cover, while insurgents poured from concealed positions in numbers intelligence hadn't predicted and commanders hadn't prepared for. Lena heard Senior Chief Vickers's voice cut through the radio with urgent precision. Hog 27, Anvil Actual, troops in contact. We are being overrun. Request immediate danger close fire support. How copy? She was already diving before he finished speaking, dropping from 15,000 to 5,000 feet in 40 seconds, eyes scanning for the IR strobe that marked friendly positions. Anvil, Hog copies all. I'm inbound from the south, 30 seconds. I need your exact position and enemy concentrations. Hogg, we're in the stone compound northeast corner of Village Grid November, Quebec 647-923. Effective fire from 360 degrees. Estimate 70 plus enemy combatants. They're closing on our position for direct assault. 70. Marcus pressed himself against the compound wall and tried to count muzzle flashes, gave up when he reached 40 and they kept coming. This wasn't a harassment attack or a probe. This was a deliberate attempt to annihilate them, planned and coordinated with more sophistication than they'd encountered before. He watched Petty Officer Jenkins take a round through the shoulder, watched Rodriguez pull the kid to cover while returning fire with one hand, and understood with absolute clarity that without air support in the next 60 seconds, none of them would see sunset. Lena came in at 400 feet with the throttles wide open, saw the compound and the fighters surrounding it in tactical positions that showed training and discipline. She saw one SEAL down, others clustered around him, saw the assault forming up for what would be a final, overwhelming push. She made calculations that existed beyond conscious thought, muscle memory and experience converging into decision. Anvil, guns, 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 danger close east positions. The GAU-8 tore into the eastern assault line, and 8 insurgents ceased to exist in a spray of depleted uranium that made the ground itself seem to evaporate. Lena pulled up, rolled right, came around for another pass while taking ground fire that pinged against her armored cockpit. Anvil, you have approximately 45 seconds before they reorganize. If you have smoke, mark your position now. Green smoke billowed from the compound. Lena switched to her Mavericks and started systematically destroying anything that moved outside that smoke perimeter. First missile took out a technical truck that was positioning for a clear shot at the compound. Second and third missiles hit buildings where she could see fighters massing for another assault. The explosions were massive in the confined village space, and she watched insurgents scatter in panic. But there were too many of them, and she had too few weapons. She expended her last 3 Mavericks, switched back to her cannon, and began making gun runs that put her directly over enemy positions at altitudes where small arms fire could reach her. The aircraft shuddered as rounds impacted. Warning lights began illuminating in her cockpit, and still, she continued making passes because the alternative was watching those SEALs die. Hog 27, Anvil Actual, you are taking effective fire. Recommend you break off and maintain standoff distance. Lena's response was immediate. Negative, Anvil. If I break off, they'll overrun your position. I'm staying until you're extracted or I'm Winchester. She made 3 more gun runs, expended every round of ammunition she carried, and when the GAU-8 finally clicked empty, she continued orbiting directly over the compound at 2,000 feet, presenting herself as the only target insurgents could see. Later, Senior Chief Vickers would tell his commanders that the enemy stopped their assault not because they'd taken casualties, but because the A-10 kept coming back, kept attacking, kept refusing to abandon the Americans below. The psychological impact of that ungainly gray aircraft diving repeatedly through defensive fire broke something in the insurgents' tactical discipline. The Marine QRF arrived 18 minutes later, fighting through to the compound while Lena continued her orbit with empty weapons and multiple damage indicators showing amber and red in her cockpit. When the last SEAL was loaded into an armored vehicle, when Senior Chief Vickers confirmed they were mobile and heading toward friendly lines, only then did she turn toward Al-Assad. The landing was rough. She'd taken rounds through her right engine, hydraulic system was operating at 60% capacity, and her left main landing gear showed an unsafe indication. She brought Mama Bear down on the emergency runway with fire trucks standing by, touched down at exactly the right speed and angle, and rolled to a stop with her hands shaking so badly she could barely shut down the remaining systems. The maintenance crew found 47 bullet holes in the aircraft, 3 of which had come within inches of critical flight systems. The maintenance chief took one look at the damage and shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, You shouldn't have been able to fly this bird home. Whatever you did up there, the aircraft held together through force of will alone." Lena climbed down from the cockpit on legs that felt uncertain, looked at her aircraft scarred and battered and still intact, and something inside her finally broke. Not dramatically, not visibly, but somewhere deep in her chest where she kept the things she couldn't afford to feel during missions. She excused herself, walked to the hangar, and sat on the floor in the darkness while her hands finally stopped shaking. Her squadron commander found her there an hour later and sat down beside her without speaking. They remained like that for several minutes before Lena spoke quietly. "I can't keep doing this. Not at this tempo, not with these stakes. Sooner or later I'm going to make a mistake, and men are going to die because I was too tired or too slow or too human. Then we reduce your flight schedule, give you time to recover." Those SEALs don't get reduced schedules. They're out there every night, and they need someone they can count on absolutely. They need you alive and functional more than they need you perfect and burned out. Lena turned to look at her squadron commander, a woman who'd flown 70 missions in the first Gulf War and understood exactly what she was feeling. "When did you know you'd reached your limit?" "When I started making decisions based on fear instead of tactical necessity. When self-preservation became louder than mission accomplishment. You're not there yet, Lena, but you're close." "So what do I do?" "You take the 3 weeks of leave that's waiting for you. You go home, see your daughter, remember what you're protecting instead of just what you're fighting. Then you come back and finish this deployment. 4 more months. That's survivable." Lena flew home 2 days later on a C-17 filled with soldiers rotating out of theater. Her dress, uniform clean and pressed. Her mind still somewhere over Anbar province calculating angles and ammunition expenditure. Emma met her at the airport in Kentucky, 7 years old and proud of her mother in ways she was too young to fully articulate. They spent 3 weeks together in a rental house near Lexington, and Lena discovered that being Mama Bear meant something different in civilian life: bedtime stories instead of danger close fire support, homework help instead of target prioritization, healing instead of fighting. But the nightmares came every night. She'd wake at 300 hearing Senior Chief Vickers requesting immediate support, would reach for her flight suit before remembering she was in Kentucky, not Iraq. Emma noticed, asked careful questions about whether Mommy was okay. Lena lied gently and promised everything was fine. On her last day of leave, she took Emma to the Louisville Aviation Museum, where an old A-10 sat on display. They walked around it together while Lena explained what made the aircraft special: the titanium bathtub protecting the pilot, the redundant systems designed to keep flying despite damage, the cannon that existed solely to protect soldiers on the ground. "Is this what you fly, Mommy?" "Very similar, sweetheart, this exact model." Emma reached out carefully and touched the scarred paint. "It doesn't look pretty like the other planes." "No, it doesn't, but pretty doesn't save lives. Tough does. Reliable does. Being there when people need you does." Emma looked up at her mother with eyes too wise for 7 years old. "Like you." Lena felt something catch in her throat, knelt down to her daughter's level. "I have to go back soon, baby. Back to Iraq. But I need you to know that everything I do there, every single flight, I'm thinking about you, about coming home to you. Will you be safe?" The truth would terrify her daughter. The lie would protect her innocence. Lena chose something in between. "I'll be as safe as I can be while doing my job, and my job is important." Protecting people. Exactly, protecting people who can't protect themselves. Emma hugged her mother tightly, and Lena held her daughter and memorized the feeling because she'd need this memory when things got dark and dangerous and impossible. She returned to Al-Assad in late October to find her aircraft fully repaired and waiting, Mama Bear painted fresh on the fuselage, with new lettering that somehow looked more permanent than before. Her squadron commander briefed her on the operational tempo. The surge was intensifying. SEAL operations had increased 30%, and her presence had been specifically requested by JSOC leadership for continued close air support. They want you specifically, Lena. Your call sign comes up in their operations orders. You've become part of their tactical planning. No pressure then. You don't have to take this. We can assign rotation pilots to cover SEAL operations. Lena looked at her aircraft sitting on the tarmac, thought about Senior Chief Vickers and Rodriguez and young Marcus Tillman, who was probably on his 10th or 15th mission by now. No, they asked for me specifically because they trust me specifically. I can't walk away from that. Even if it costs you everything you have left. Especially then. The final 4 months of deployment became a blur of missions that tested everything she'd learned in 16 years of flying. Lena supported operations in Ramadi, Fallujah, Haditha, and a dozen villages whose names she couldn't pronounce. She flew on nights when weather grounded every other aircraft. She made gun runs through defensive fire that should have killed her. She stayed overhead until her fuel gauge read empty, and then somehow found 5 more minutes to keep those men alive. The maintenance crews started calling her aircraft the Lucky Bird, because it kept coming home despite accumulating damage that should have been fatal. Marcus Tillman was on the ground for 23 of her sorties during those months. He'd grown from terrified rookie to competent operator to someone Senior Chief Vickers trusted with team leadership positions. He'd learned to move through hostile territory with confidence, to return fire with precision instead of panic, to keep his head during the chaos because Mama Bear would be overhead when everything went wrong. He'd also learned something else, something he didn't fully understand but felt deeply, that the calm female voice on the radio represented something larger than tactical air support. She represented reliability in a world of chaos, competence in a theater of incompetence, someone who showed up every single time without excuses or failures. During a rare overlap at Al-Assad when the platoon was staging between operations, Marcus asked Rodriguez about the pilot who'd saved them repeatedly. "You ever meet her, Mama Bear?" "Once briefly. She's not what you'd expect." "What do you mean?" "She's quiet. No swagger, no bragging, no need to prove anything. Just complete confidence in her ability to do the job. She stands maybe 5'4", looks like someone's mom because she literally is someone's mom, and she's flown more combat sorties than half the fighter pilots on this base combined. The F-16 guys don't talk about her much." Rodriguez snorted. "The F-16 guys fly fast and look good. She flies ugly and keeps us alive. There's no comparison." Marcus filed this information away carefully in the notebook where he'd been documenting tactics and lessons learned. Later that evening, he'd write a full page about the value of quiet competence versus visible showmanship, about how the most critical capabilities often came in unglamorous packages, about how trust was earned through consistency rather than flash. He was writing about Captain Lena Ruskin, though he'd never spoken to her directly. He was writing about Mama Bear, who'd become something of a legend among the SEAL platoons operating in western Iraq. In December, 2 weeks before Christmas and 3 weeks before Lena's scheduled rotation home, the mission came through that would define her entire deployment. SEAL Team 5 had located a high-value target in a compound outside Hitan al-Qaeda facilitator responsible for coordinating suicide bombings throughout Anbar province. The intelligence was solid but time-sensitive. They had a 12-hour window to conduct the raid before the target relocated. The mission brief was thorough but concerning. The compound sat in the middle of a densely populated area, surrounded by civilian homes and businesses. The approach routes offered limited cover. Intelligence suggested the target maintained a security force of 20 fighters, well-armed and experienced. Extraction would be complicated by narrow streets and limited helicopter landing zones. Senior Chief Vickers studied the terrain photos and made his assessment. "This is going to get loud. We'll need CAS on station before we even approach." The planning officer nodded. We've requested Hog 27 specifically. She'll be overhead before you insert. Lena received her brief at 2200 hours, studied the target area carefully, and made her own assessment. This was the kind of mission where everything could go perfectly right or catastrophically wrong with no middle ground. She'd need to be perfect, and perfect would barely be enough. She launched at 1:30, established orbit over the target area at 2:10, and waited in the darkness while the SEALs moved toward their objective. Marcus was point man for his team during this operation, the first time Senior Chief Vickers had trusted him with that responsibility. He moved through the pre-dawn streets of Hit with his weapon up, eyes scanning for threats, aware that Mama Bear was somewhere overhead but unable to see her in the darkness. The compound appeared exactly as intelligence had depicted: high walls, reinforced gate, two visible sentries on the roof. The assault went perfectly for exactly 90 seconds. They breached the gate, cleared the first courtyard, and were approaching the main structure when someone inside triggered the alarm, and the entire compound erupted with automatic weapons fire from positions the intelligence photos had somehow missed. Suddenly there weren't 20 fighters but 40, and they weren't just defending but counterattacking with the coordination of trained soldiers. Hog 27, Anvil Actual, troops in heavy contact. We are surrounded in the compound. Request immediate fire support all quadrants except our position. Lena had been watching through her night vision systems, had seen the assault develop, and was already descending before the call came through. Anvil, Hog is inbound. Give me an IR strobe and prepare for danger close employment. What followed was the most intense 40 minutes of close air support in the entire Iraq War, though the citation would never fully capture what happened. Lena made 17 separate gun runs, each one threading between civilian structures to hit targets mere meters from friendly forces. She expended all her Mavericks with surgical precision, clearing firing positions that threatened to overrun the SEAL position. When her ammunition ran low, she began making dry runs, flying attack profiles, without actually firing to suppress enemy movement through psychological pressure alone. Inside the compound, Marcus watched pieces of the wall explode as Mama Bear's cannon fire walked across enemy positions with accuracy that defied physics. He watched a fighter with an RPG get vaporized by a Maverick strike that impacted so close, Marcus felt the shockwave through the ground. He watched the A-10 return again and again, despite taking continuous ground fire, watched it pivot and roll and dive with the agility people claimed it didn't possess. Anvil, I'm Winchester on all weapons, but I'm staying overhead. Marine QRF is 15 minutes out. You need to hold position. Roger, Hog will be here. But the insurgents knew the Americans were trapped and ammunition was finite. They regrouped, prepared for a final assault, and might have succeeded except that Mama Bear continued orbiting directly overhead at an altitude where every fighter could see her. The psychological impact was profound. American air power wasn't leaving, wasn't surrendering the sky, wouldn't let them win. The assault never came. When the Marines fought through to the compound, they found 32 SEALs alive, the high-value target dead, and a defensive perimeter littered with enemy casualties that told the story of perfect close air support delivered under impossible conditions. Senior Chief Vickers made a point of requesting the tail number of the A-10 that had covered them, made sure it was recorded in the after-action report, alongside a recommendation for whatever medal you gave pilots who refused to leave. Lena landed at Al-Assad with her aircraft shot to pieces for the second time in 4 months, with stress fractures in the wing spars that maintenance said should have caused catastrophic failure, with zero ammunition and fuel reserves that shouldn't have been enough to reach home. She shut down the engines, completed her post-flight checklist with hands that had finally stopped shaking somewhere over the desert, and climbed down to find her squadron commander waiting with a full bird colonel and 2 men in civilian clothes who identified themselves as CIA. They debriefed her for 3 hours, wanted every detail about the engagement, complimented her on tactics that they claimed had never been employed with such effectiveness. When they finished, the colonel looked at her seriously. "Captain Ruskin, you're being put in for the Distinguished Flying Cross for tonight's action. Your squadron commander is also recommending you for a Presidential Unit citation alongside SEAL Team 5. Lena accepted this news with a quiet nod, too exhausted to process what it meant, too focused on the fact that everyone had made it home alive. "But there's something else," the colonel continued. "We'd like you to meet some of the men you've been supporting. They're here at Al-Assad staging for their rotation home, and they specifically requested to meet the pilot they call Mama Bear." 10 minutes later, Lena found herself in a briefing room facing 32 Navy SEALs still wearing their combat gear. Senior Chief Vickers stepped forward first, extended his hand, and spoke with the formal precision of someone who'd rehearsed these words carefully. "Captain Ruskin, on behalf of every man in this room, thank you for bringing us home. Every single time, without exception, you've been there when we needed you most. You've saved lives that would have been lost, supported missions that would have failed, and shown us what perfection looks like when it matters. We don't have medals to give you, but we want you to know that every one of us is alive because you're exactly who you are, someone who shows up, does the job, and refuses to quit until we're safe." The room erupted in applause that felt surreal in its intensity. These were men who'd seen the worst humanity could offer, who'd fought in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, and they were applauding a 41-year-old pilot who just wanted to do her job well. Marcus stepped forward from the group, younger than most, and spoke carefully. "Ma'am, I was terrified on my first mission. Didn't think I'd make it. Then you showed up and I realized that someone was watching over us, someone who wouldn't let us fail. I learned how to do this job by watching you do yours, perfectly, every time, no excuses. Thank you for teaching me what competence looks like." Lena felt something crack in the protective armor she'd built around her emotions, felt tears threatening that she absolutely could not shed in front of these men. She cleared her throat carefully and spoke to them all. "Gentlemen, you make it easy. You're professionals who know what you're doing down there, and my job is just to be where you need me when you need me. I'm honored to have flown for you, and I'm grateful every one of you made it home." Later that evening, alone in her quarters, Lena finally allowed herself to cry, not from fear or exhaustion or trauma, but from the overwhelming weight of having done something that mattered absolutely, of having been exactly what those men needed when they needed it most. She rotated home 2 weeks later with a Distinguished Flying Cross, over 800 combat flight hours, and the knowledge that 32 men were alive because she'd refused to accept anything less than perfect. Emma met her at the airport in Kentucky, and Lena scooped up her daughter and held her for a long time while Emma asked excited questions about medals and airplanes, and whether Mommy was home for good now. "For good, baby, I'm home for good." But that wasn't quite true. 3 months later, sitting in her new assignment at Nellis Air Force Base training the next generation of A-10 pilots, Lena received a letter postmarked from Virginia Beach. Inside was a photograph showing 32 Navy SEALs gathered around an A-10 Thunderbolt with Mama Bear painted on its fuselage. On the back, written in careful block letters, "We told them the story. Every instructor, every new guy, everyone who'll ever work with A-10s. They'll know that call sign, what it meant, and who you are. Thank you for being perfect when it mattered. Anvil Actual." Lena pinned the photograph to her office wall, right next to her flight suit where she'd see it every day. Below it, she placed a small handwritten note that read simply, "They deserved someone who showed up. I'm grateful I could be that person." Years later, Marcus Tillman, now a lieutenant and SEAL team leader himself, would use Captain Lena Ruskin as a case study when training new operators. He'd tell them about the pilot who positioned herself before the call came, who conserved ammunition knowing follow-on engagements were likely, who made 17-gun runs through defensive fire because quitting meant people died. He'd tell them about quiet competence versus visible showmanship, about trust earned through consistency, about the most critical capabilities often coming in unglamorous packages. And somewhere in Kentucky, a single mother named Emma Ruskin would grow up understanding that her mother had been Mama Bear not because she was fearless, but because she'd chosen to be reliable when reliability meant everything, to be the person others could count on absolutely, to show up every single time without excuses or failures, to be perfect when perfect was the only thing that kept people alive. The legend endured not because of medals or citations, but because of what Senior Chief Vickers had written in that letter. They told the story. Every new pilot learned about Mama Bear. Every SEAL operator heard about the A-10 pilot who refused to leave. Every person who needed to understand what dedication looked like eventually encountered the story of Captain Lena Ruskin and the 74 combat sorties where she'd been exactly perfect enough. That's what legacy meant in the end. Not monuments or speeches, but the quiet knowledge that when people needed someone absolutely, when lives hung on 3-second decisions at 300 feet, when everything was impossible except quitting, and quitting meant death, there had been someone who showed up, did the job, and brought everyone home. Emma kept her mother's Distinguished Flying Cross in a display case in her college dorm room, and when her roommates asked about it, she'd tell them simply, "My mom protected people who couldn't protect themselves. She was exactly who they needed when they needed her most." And somewhere in that statement lived the entire truth of what Mama Bear had meant and would always mean. Not the aircraft or the weapons or the tactics, but the person who'd climbed into that cockpit 843 times, knowing that her decisions would determine whether families stayed whole or shattered, knowing the weight of that responsibility, and choosing every single time to be worthy of the trust placed in her. She'd been Mama Bear, she'd been perfect, she'd brought them all home. And that was enough.